Hi there, this is Adam. I have what's called cerebellar cognitive affective syndrome, a form of ataxia. Strange to think it's been about 8 years since I felt like doing a proper video. This is going to be a bit different than anything I've consciously done before. I'm aiming for self-advocacy and sharing my journey. I self-diagnosed this condition in myself earlier this year, first discovering the definition at the end of September 2023. About a week ago, the latest evidence supporting this diagnosis is the fact that I have an absent ciliospinal reflex. A person's pupil is supposed to dilate when there is a painful stimulus to the neck or face. Painful or surprising. I learned about this reflex while I was studying more closely my results I got 6 years ago from the ophthalmologist. This professional computerized eye test shows that I have significant deficits in the horizontal metrics compared to being much better than the average in the vertical eye movement measurements. This data supports my story that I fell off the trampoline when I was 5 years old. I stepped backwards, trying to avoid a friend in the middle who was trying to tag me. My right foot went through the uncovered rim, in between the frame and the fabric, inside one of the gaps between the two springs. As I fell backwards, bending naturally at the knee, the bridge of my foot stayed caught underneath the bounce mat. Upside down, I hit my head on one of the steel support poles so hard I remember a flash of white light. The horizontal gaze center in the brain is mainly clustered down in the pons and brainstem, right where the spinal cord exits the skull. This would be the focal point of the whiplash from the impact compared to the more protected vertical gaze center up in the midbrain. The flash of light would seem to be my ciliospinal reflex being destroyed, possibly because I stretched out too far on one side of my body, combined with the jolt to my visual cortex and cerebellum. As I recall, my childhood dog, Freeway, rushed over immediately, nudging me in the face to get up. So I ran inside to wake up my sleeping mother. Cerebellar cognitive affective syndrome was proposed by Dr. Schmaumann approximately 2 years later. I tackled his screening tool as best I could by myself, failing 2 tasks, putting me in the category of probably have CAS. Combined with how the doctor talks about eye movement deficits and the connection to autistic-like traits, I'm confident in my diagnosis, because I also test very high on the autism spectrum according to tests like the CAT-Q. Building my life on my own understanding and expectations, perhaps not so curiously in hindsight, began with philosophy. I feel like a man who has woken up from a coma. This is mainly because I tried to debate him once on his call-in show, an internet philosopher, one singular Stefan Molyneux. He was the first person to allow me to lead myself back to the accident where the debate ended. I fully accepted my mother's paradigm before his help that she forced upon me, that I could and had fully recovered from the concussion, if she ever even used that word or mentioned it to anyone. I remember a strange conversation once with her, something about a broken television set doesn't mean the crisp, clear TV station isn't still broadcasting. This might be a strange top-down analogy for a soul with our passive goal to receive predetermined instructions from a central authority that serves to entertain and entrance, aligned with the needs of the broadcaster and advertisers. Science does not support any significant recovery from central nervous system damage, only adaptation and compensation, usually incomplete and measurable 20 years later. Stefan's head was beaten against the door by his mother in a clear act of abuse. My mother escalated to torture. I am a victim of intrafamilial child torture. I gave her the chance to talk about it, discussing with both my parents in the room the separate adverse childhood experiences study, my score, and the correlation with negative life outcomes. bombinthebrain.com for more. They had nothing useful to say. I mostly remember her avoiding eye contact and my father saying something about how he still wanted me to serve the cult that I was forced to grow up in, and I could theologically be forgiven when the conversation somehow moved on to my perceived personal failings and struggles. Now I can see 33 out of 39 traits of torture in how they both treated me. I talked to Stefan not too long after this. A new awareness of the accident and a clearer understanding of my abusive parents and trauma I was attempting to process led me to get a new apartment with the full intention of figuring out more about my history. I sold my car to afford talk therapy and get started on the right foot, as they say. Thinking hard about the accident, I remembered I once read in my high school library the dictionary definition of a strange word, saccades. Somehow I had gathered the knowledge that an ophthalmologist could provide me evidence showing how bad the accident was, a measuring tool I could humbly subject myself to, like my score that I had discussed with my parents. I immediately shared this insight gained with the world on social media, my therapist at my next session, and even my resume. Slowly, a dream that I had experienced the night of the accident coalesced in my mind. The short version is I had been playing on a playground, the best one I had ever experienced, and we had to go home early because it mysteriously wasn't safe anymore or was falling apart or being destroyed or demolished. I accepted some vague explanation as part of the dream sequence, a directive as a plot device directly from my subconscious, basically. Voice of God style, if you will, in the dream, akin to parents half yelling at their kids on the equipment, is the best waking analogy, because that's what I was used to in life from adults. Some parents drove us home, Peanuts style, talking in the front seat, like wah, 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 wah. And when we arrived home, I rushed to continue playing in the backyard, discovering a plant-eating dinosaur, where the trampoline was, and a tropical forest. It could still talk, but quickly got upset and unintelligible. As the creature's intelligence faded, it wandered off. Inside the house was normal, a lunch or dinner. And the dream continued like that for what seemed like a lifetime, getting more absurd and terrifying with each scene change as everyone turned into dinosaurs. Adults first. Forests and houses even burned down, earthquakes, and I finally I transformed into a T-Rex. The dream, surprisingly, isn't difficult to connect directly with my experience. Like dinosaurs in their natural habitat, I was blending in and doing okay despite abuse I remember occurring before the accident. As my parents' third child, a much more implicit dysfunction had been settled into. Like the disappointment with the super fun playground, threats, usually nonverbal, were often enough. I just had to emotionally get a feel for my two older brothers' experience to know I couldn't figuratively play over there. I have a scar on my left thumb from my mother's evil act of torture. I don't know why she reacted the way she did. Maybe it's obvious to someone who wasn't tortured. Perhaps it was naked bigotry against children. I couldn't be allowed to have a legitimate and uncommunicatable need. I was an extension of her and the cult. She took full advantage of an upset and unintelligible creature like the dinosaur from my dream when I rushed inside to wake her up. It's almost unbelievable. I remember arguing about, and it escalating quickly, that I thought I needed my nails trimmed. She almost immediately, psychopathically, subdued the emotional side of my psyche, the brain hemisphere that couldn't talk, just like the dinosaur, overwhelming it by cutting into my left thumb. Remember, that's the right brain. So deep and so painfully, with cuticle scissors, I collapsed. I don't know if there's a name for the psychological dissonance or literal physical breakdown from the recent stress and pain my nervous system was enduring. I want something more than the word torture to try to explain the unexplainable. I have additional explicit, unhinged details and, unfortunately, other disturbing memories in this category called my difficult history that doesn't seem appropriate to share here. She had a veneer of a good mother, a narcissistic way of telling neighborhood kids it's okay for us to go to her if there's an emergency or we're having trouble feeding ourselves for some reason. It would seem to be that it was a meaningless performance, only ever serving her own power and control. I remember the white of my bone or my thumb's nerve fiber itself. Asserting my own autonomy later as a teenager resulted in another scar on my left hand. The T-Rex, a counterpart to the first plant eater, would seem to partially represent the ciliospinal reflex. I'm thinking some pain on your upper face, your trunk. Historically, that means a predator has caught you and you need to do something. This dream was telling me I had many years of blending in and evolving to do before I would be capable of wandering off. I didn't have any conscious adult understanding that I might be living in a dangerous cult hinging around a narcissistic, deranged mother. Any deliberate attempt at understanding on my part, I'm now certain, would have led to escalation, like Gavin Peterson's death on July 9th this year, 5 days after our nation's birthday. We failed him, and society almost failed me. I wrote a challenging think piece in college, starting to scratch the surface of what I went through, and 5 days later, Osama bin Laden paid for his evil. And 5 days after a popular Israeli-owned art website decided my approach to art was invalid, sharing a character co-created with AI that I innocently named Gavin from liking a classmate's name in middle school, the October 7th attack and massacre on people in Israel occurred. I pay attention when patterns like this that Carl Jung talked about start to emerge, particularly when I remember a self-serving diatribe my mother once spewed about how Child Protective Services doesn't actually act in good faith, and it'd make her so depressed to have them involved in our family that she might kill herself if we were ever taken away from her. I thought we were a well-respected, well-paid, fully medically insured LDS seminary teachers' kids, but what did I know? Whatever you believe happened, I think most people who get this far in considering my case can still follow me if I segue from the dream to a borrowed Chinese foot binding analogy. If you don't know, more than 100 years ago, small feet were considered beautiful in China. Many people crippled themselves for life in service of this cultural practice. If I had to put into words what it was like to still exist when I woke up the next day, I was desperate to survive and not spend every waking moment knowing my mother was deeply disturbed. Far too much to process for a 5-year-old. We settled back into the momentum of our family's culture. She even made up a passable story that I had caught my thumb in one of the trampoline springs. Like the cut she made was already there, and it was my fault for not communicating clearly that I had a type of non-obvious brain injury that wasn't described yet for medical silence. My first realizations that I might be in a similar situation, psychologically footbound into a semblance of normal, was listening to my pirated music collection. After talking to my parents about my ACE score and concerns, my mother introduced me to what's been called file sharing and instilled a response in me of feeling entitled to songs. These songs represented real people who hadn't done me any harm. I couldn't enjoy and escape into the music like I used to. I noticed ad-supported streaming and FM radio was much better. I was so desperate for simple human connection and healing. This energy grew into a new apartment, talk therapy for my history, evidence supporting my brain injury, and my best efforts to learn and grow under my own rational understanding, expectations, and chosen sacrifices, such as specifically buying a decent music collection as a form of separation and individuation from my terrible family of origin. This energy is best communicated in definitions. I decided for myself that my family members were victims of the definition of a cult when they started putting too much pressure on me to do things they wanted, and naturally things changed. Last time that happened, I was forcibly made to attend church. Last time I challenged them, yet my mother could stay home any time of the week that she conveniently had a migraine. With my new point of view as a traumatic brain injury survivor, I can see now that I had decided what was going on, and my cerebellum, part of the brainstem, hadn't decided where or how. There was no useful alignment in my psyche without more information. I also didn't want to see myself as a victim of all I've been through equally as much as judging them to be part of a cult. A misapplication of empathy, really. So I still unwittingly created some cognitive dissonance in continuing to associate with them. I had a perfectionist attitude deep down that I could somehow fix my family. I wonder where I learned that. If asked, I would have said that I wanted my presence to be a positive thing for their benefit, hoping for healing and apologies, instead of asking myself what I really wanted and what was really happening. Sort of automatic and enmeshing habits filled the gap until I found the courage to discuss my ACE score. My younger brother introduced me to an illicit substance that I use legally now in a very specific form because it seems to keep me sharp, combined with other healthy supplements from my research. They found a place for me, cheap rent, in my grandmother's guest house, where I could look busy and be presented in a socially acceptable way despite my drug use and being completely alone. I had wondered if I could somehow eventually acquire the house, building and testing a small project with the aim of reducing the heating bill I've shared previously in a video. It should work, yet I don't see it ever becoming anything more than a do-it-yourself add-on to prudent things like turning down the furnace thermostat when no one is home. The simple staying warm and comfortable angle of the project has me now knowing that part of growing up is realizing no one is going to come tuck you in at night. A more complex way of satiating and providing for oneself that valid yet childish desire doesn't magically turn into a business plan or real-world action. I would be happy to make another larger proper one if and when I live in a suitable place. Probably an RV or manufactured home, because my condition might severely limit my earning potential. Virtue seems more accessible to me in other ways, anyway. I saw evidence of the cult when I purchased Bitcoin at an ATM that securely gave me the private keys. I was immediately followed by a car and felt threatened, even alone in the guest house, until I destroyed the 1/3 or 1/2 of a Bitcoin I owned. Unfortunately, the statute of limitations has run. This happened before evidence of my brain injury emerged. I don't expect I'll ever get over the financial threshold this awful experience represents. Some forms of evil might only be able to be rooted out generationally, and we have a long way to go. In my comatose state, ignorantly I did things I'm not proud of. Thankfully, nothing too egregious directly to other people. I'm still afraid of desire because of transformation, the T-Rex dream theme. This psychological vulnerability has been horrible to manage at times. Sympathy and just trying to understand people and concepts that are inappropriate for someone who has figuratively been a 5-year-old this entire time has at times morphed into a negative self-image and extremely self-destructive behavior. It was mental illness, pure and simple. I want to have the healthiest possible relationship to the adult world, along with negotiating for my needs and desires. This new supportable theory of the difficulties my mind has been subconsciously dealing with alone all this time has me more proud of myself than ever that I have stumbled forward regardless, such as attempting to treat myself for teenage depression with St. John's wort and sending in an official resignation letter addressed to the former structure of the cult via certified mail, among all the other steps, big and small, that I've taken along the way to have my own identity and boundaries. Since I have now figuratively woken up from my coma, literally pinching myself, as is said you are supposed to do if you are in a dream, to check my ciliospinal reflex. How have things been going since 1996? Some of the last things I remember is enjoying the magic school bus, the big 19-hour America Online internet outage, and thinking public school was supposed to exist to at least teach me the scientific method. I guess we're doing okay because no one figured out how to do it for me. I just had to choose to be brave enough to do something about what happened. After being tortured for my first reasonable response to a painful accident, I'm grateful beyond measure to Stefan Molyneux and countless nameless people who have somehow given me clues all these years, especially in reconstructing the dream. It's hard to believe how much we've lost in missed opportunities and collaboration. I promise to continue to bring the best version of myself to the table while not overextending myself with these limitations, and I wonder what I'll learn next now the case seems to be closed on one of the most disruptive events of my life and childhood. I wish I could press charges on my parents somehow, as much as I wish for a different outcome for Gavin. Acknowledging my legitimate self-defense impulses towards such terrible people instead of pretending they don't exist has been key to getting them out of my life and continuing my journey. My mother almost immediately said something literally crazy about actually seeing a demon in the bushes when I was with her, and I was choosing to stay in my head and let myself safely feel these impulses instead of swatting them away and serving some other conception or game of who she was. I didn't challenge or seek more information about her statement. I think she saw an inkling of consequences for her actions in my eyes or demeanor. Truly a satanic person. Maybe the hell she or anyone who associates with her might be living in is justice enough. My extended family and other people easily disappeared from my life once I knew, and I can still sometimes see their manipulations and tantalizing performance they sadly think they have to put on. In summary, I believe cerebellar cognitive affective syndrome affects me at one of the highest, most abstract levels of thinking possible, while still being measurable and significant. Part of myself is unsure, childlike, and frustrated in an unchosen, physiological, and permanent way. I can do my best to cooperate and practice self-knowledge as I've been doing, collaborating, doing better with more information, and growing the virtuous habits in myself, yet I will be limited by autistic behaviors and executive spatial language and social emotional deficits. If I couldn't walk because of my ataxia, I would immediately know if someone truly meant to hold my arm firmly and support my spastic body to achieve the goal of getting out of the car and into a building, like I learned to help someone once. I had to fully commit to it. I've been learning to ask for help when I need it, like requesting my debate in good faith on the philosophy call-in show. And now that I know more about my history and condition, I can fully commit to what people are kind of doing and saying in the moment, like this spontaneous part of the video. And I can figure out if it's aligning with the goal, like I helped that person once. So, excellent videos of people who have also experienced cerebellar cognitive affective syndrome, intrafamilial child torture, and those who've endured political torture, talking about their experiences, have inspired me to tell a bit about my own. May my story speak to our fundamentally pro-social, happy and spontaneous nature, like I remember being myself as a child before the accident, when I was outside of my parents' sphere of influence. Gavin's mother appears to have done her duty to be a better person than who she was when she lost custody of him, taking a picture of him to show he was malnourished and advocating for him. If I had a friend who I wanted to take care of with my condition, I'm not sure what would help. This new awareness could be argued, if anything untoward happens to me, to place me in the legal category of dependent adult, my mental impairment specifically restricting my ability to protect my rights. I have a recent pending criminal case of someone who broke the law causing me harm where I broke my thumb. The same thumb. I'm entrusting our legal system with my goal of obtaining reasonable justice and restitution for my out-of-pocket medical bills, pain, and suffering. I might have to consider myself to be a vulnerable adult if the law of the land is not upheld in this matter. Myself being unable to obtain services necessary for my welfare and finances. This could indicate a problem like how Donald Trump alludes to the question of if we will still have a country or not. My limited perception of as an individual, I hope, can be useful in that regard. I will also accept an argument demonstrating my misinterpretation or misapplication of the relevant laws. People have shown genuine concern for me over the years, and I didn't know what to do with their empathy when my torturer was still in my life. Maybe I would simply nudge my friend in the most abstract way possible to satisfy my concerns and try to learn something for myself at the same time. I don't want to feel entitled to anything from other people or exploit anyone. If my mother's demon was real, let's keep it right where it belongs. Mysteriously, my text edit program on my Mac, usually what I'd expect to be a very stable, basic, offline computer program, crashed while writing this script. So I think we're on the right track.